What's going on, everybody? This is Afro Think Tank, and today we're going to talk about the exploitation of Africa and its resources, how it's done, and how we as Black people, when talking to each other, need to take in consideration what's happening to us from the outside. Because what has happened is all of us African people, because of the politics of the past, because of the greed of certain groups of people, we have been displaced globally across this planet. We have been put to work in European colonies that are now called countries and nations. Keep in mind, these places are still European colonies. Australia, South Africa, America, Puerto Rico, Guam, Venezuela, many different places where white people reside, Europeans reside, are colonies, former colonies, current colonies of Europe. And with those colonies comes the economic model of these Europeans, right? And the economic model of the Europeans has changed over the last couple hundred years. But at first, it was the economic model of lordship. You had the kings. Kings. It was kings and queens of Europe who commissioned the exploitation of Africa and the rest of the world. Right? Those kings, those European kings and queens that get praised right now. Those kings and queens of Europe, they're still sitting on all that blood money. They're still sitting on all that African money. It's those kings and queens and their relatives who own all the corporations, the old European corporations and institutions that birthed all the American corporations and institutions that we know today, that has transformed into the modern day institutions that now control and run the world with the very same blood money that has been rotating within the European economy, within the SWIFT system, all right, within the International Monetary Fund's financial reach of the world, right? And what Europeans have always done, they have used their construct of government to benefit their corporations. They use their militaries to protect corporations. America was a conglomerate of European businesses that use the British governmental empire to enforce the corporation's ability to exploit lands on this planet, right? And that still hasn't changed to this day. So when African people who are in America, when they're in the Caribbean, South America, when we are having conversations with continental Africans, depending on what country it is that they come from, sometimes if it's an acrimonious altercation, we tend to take shots from a nationalistic position, which I hate, because we as Africans should never take shots at each other from a nationalistic position, especially when that nationalistic position is a European national position that we have been forced to adopt under duress. As an African who lives in America, as an African American, as a Black person, I would never compare the institution of America to the institution of the Congo. I would never compare the institution of America to the institution of Nigeria, because I know that you can't compare the two, because one is a parasite, right, and the other is not. One is a bacterial virus and the other is not. And the effects of that bacterial virus affects all things globally, right? So as an African American, African Americans who are, within our communities, who we are exploited and taken advantage of by those very same corporations domestically, right? Domestically, we are taken advantage by those same corporations under regulation, under the very few bits of legislation that keep corporations from enslaving us, even though those regulations are being slowly and surely dismantled like an onion right now as we speak, because corporations don't like regulations. Regulations are with government, or when the government says, hey, you cannot do this because it may be dangerous. Remember when Donald Trump deregulated the railroad industry? Quietly, after he did that, there were several derailments because the railroad industry would like to go faster to deliver more goods so they can make more money. The government with regulations say you can only go so fast because it's dangerous. And if you spill any of your product that you're shipping, it may damage any community that you happen to be passing by, any groups of people that will be affected by, any type of derailment. Well, corporate companies don't care about that because they're willing to take that loss because those are just numbers. They'll make more money speeding their trains up and delivering more goods by volume. And if they have a couple crashes that kill a couple people, that ruin a couple neighborhoods, that poisons a couple environments, that doesn't matter because the bottom line, they'll come out on top in the end. That's why they want deregulation. That's why they do anything they can to deregulate. That's why rich people are not really Democrats or Republicans. They only play Democrat or Republican depending on which group of people will do the thing they need to do to relieve that regulation so that they can do what they want, untethered by a federal government, because they are competing with multinational corporations that's coming from companies that also don't have regulations, that's not constrained by certain governmental regulations, like China. They just do what they want, right? So, we forget that in Africa, the reason why the countries are the way that they are is because Europeans and their lordship at first are the ones who sponsored and financed the destruction of our civilized societies utilizing barbaric Neanderthal tactics. That's what they did. They stole all of our intellectual properties. They stole our design systems and they duplicated that in Europe to benefit themselves. And they continue to steal our resources, like Congo. I always say in my videos, it started with the Congo and it's going to end with the Congo. Nigeria and Congo are the most important countries in Africa. They have the most resources between the two. Both those countries, if they were to have good governance, if they were to be allowed to organize themselves and situate themselves, which they are currently fighting to do now, but they were allowed to do this unencumbered by the succubus, by the viruses, by the bacterial infection of the European governmental systems and non-governmental organizations and all those entities that support them. Nigeria and Congo will be the center of the world, the richest places on the planet, with the smartest people on the planet, with the most economically viable areas on the planet where everybody globally will want to come to live, work, and play. One day it will be like that. But right now it's not, because they're being taken advantage of by a virus, which is the European Western society. And it hurts me when I hear a black person who, even though we fought our own fight because we live with the beast itself, we live with the worst manifestation of that virus now, right? And we unwittingly have contributed, with our strength, with our inventions, with our ingenuity under duress. We have contributed to the destruction of the world. Unbeknownst to us, or unwillingly, we have been used as tools to do such things. And it's just sad when you have a African American who has a 12th grade American education, which is not really saying much. When getting in an argument with an African, will try to compare and say, well, look at your country. Why can't you get yourselves together? Why are you fleeing your country? So any respectable black revolutionary would never chastise Africans on the continent for the conditions of their country. That's why Tariq Nasheed is no revolutionary. He's fake. He's false. He's not real. That's why Phil Scott is no revolutionary. He's fake. He's false. He's not real. That's why a lot of the Yvette Carnell is not a real revolutionary. She's fake. She's false. She's not real. Because when push comes to shove, when we get a little friction, when you get a little pushback from your counterparts, the first thing they do is they talk trash about the government systems within the countries of Africa. They don't take in consideration that those countries are not designed by Africans. They don't take into consideration that those countries and the systems that are running those countries were not designed by Africans. They're not taking in consideration that those countries just got liberated in the 60s, the same time African people in America liberated ourselves and gave all other POCs the right and ability to come to America and thrive. They don't take the consideration is that while we were being enslaved, they were being colonized by the same European. How can a group of Africans who were blindsided by such a devilish Neanderthal with a machine gun that nobody globally could fight back during that time? It was the gun, the cannon, the machine gun is what gave white people the ability to defeat us. Without the machine gun, they couldn't defeat us. They couldn't defeat us with those muskets. They couldn't defeat us even with the cannon. It was the machine gun. The machine gun was the game changer. And the machine gun will force you to sell your people into slavery. The machine gun will force you to go to war with another nation to gather other people to sell or to sell into slavery instead of your own people. Someone putting a machine gun to your head and say, hey, let's do business or else, that will compel any nation to do that for the sake of their people. These African people with their 12th grade American education they still look at Africa as one country, as one big tribe that were just fighting each other. And because they couldn't get along, one group of people fighting each other, they just sold each other out, not realizing that these groups, these nations were fighting. They have historical issues with each other. They were fighting each other like every group of people on the planet, just like Europeans. They've never stopped fighting each other. Yet we don't do the same comparison with Europeans who are currently genociding each other right now, who've never stopped genociding each other. As a matter of fact, Europeans literally went to Africa to genocide Africans so they can have more money to go to genocide other Europeans. Western nations right now have no problem genociding other Europeans because the virus, the bacteria, the Neanderthal has no loyalty to even its own self, to even its own homeland, to even its own institution. It's literally eating its own self right now. As you can see, white supremacy and its way of being, its Western government systems are crumbling. It's cannibalizing itself because it's not sustainable for life. It's not conducive for nature. Nature is also correcting itself because nature created the environment to create these hostile creatures that we call Europeans, these Neanderthal 2.0s. And have you ever noticed that Neanderthals were more like monkeys until white people just figured out that they are mostly Neanderthal? Now all of a sudden Neanderthals are dynamic cultural creatures that should be respected and should be honored almost like human beings. Have you noticed that? Now we're supposed to put more respect on the Neanderthal's name now that we're finding out that Europeans are actually Neanderthals, human hybrids. But I'm going to post a video where this one enlightened European, he just tells the truth for how it is. It's white people are the problem everywhere globally. Europeans are the problem of Africa. You got Europeans who will genocide Africans and then say, hey, you Africans, look at you. I don't know why you guys are like that. You guys need to step your game up. You guys need to innovate. Y'all need better leaders. While at the same time, those same Europeans and their governmental three-legged agencies are in those countries infiltrating the systems that they've created for the African to be destabilized. And they're making sure they put in puppet leaders. There's a few puppet leaders left in Africa, and we all know who they are. We see them. They're all in their 80s, 90s, still hanging on old neocolonialism. We're waiting for them guys to die. Let's just be honest. We're waiting for a lot of these old white European puppets to die. Most of Africa, the youth, 70% of Africa is waiting for these old neocolonial traitors, Kunarians, Afropeans to die. In America, we're also waiting for some to die. Some of them are judges. We're waiting for them to die. We're waiting for a lot of them to die because they need to, because they're in the way of progress, right? But while that's happening, Black people need to start elevating the conversation and taking certain things into context. You can't look down on your African brothers and sisters while the country that you live in benefits from this destabilization of that country. While you're wearing the gold mined out of the fields from little boys in those countries, you got the nerve to talk trash about those countries. While wearing the gold that was mined from children from those countries. You can't talk about African countries and how poor they are when you're wearing the diamonds that was scraped out of the ground by little boys and little girls in those countries, by the same Western corporations that you purchase all your goods from. You can't talk about African countries and how they, they ain't wearing clothes and they ain't got this and they ain't got this and they're not up to snuff, while you're wearing the labels of white European colonizers who stole African patterns and designs, slapped their white names on it, and only then did you value those products. While you walk around wearing African pattern traditional clothing that you should be wearing for free, that you should be putting your name on it, that the pride of that product shouldn't be because it has some white racist Italian or French or European colonizers, oppressors name on it, but maybe an African nation's name on it. The pride should be that it's an African pattern designed by your African ancestors that has an actual meaning, not because a white person put his name on it. But that's where we are in society. But there will be some black person in America who goes out and buys a $5,000 sweater that was made for 25 cents in a factory in China, right? That material was mined from some plant in Africa for less than one goddamn penny. But when you an economic victim, you paid $1,000 for that. And that white man got the money, and all he did was slap his name on it. And then the very same similar product will come out. They just won't put his name on it. And you'll find it at Farmer Mills for $29.99 on sale. The very exact same product. Or you'll go on AliExpress and find the very same product for $15, and you can just order it yourself and slap your own name on it. Your name should have more value than some white guy you never met that never really wanted you to wear the clothes. They just wanted to go to your continent and steal the pattern from your ancestors in order to sell it. But they call themselves designers, but they're really thieves. So I just need African Americans and people who in the West, who live in these Western countries, who like to disparage continental Africans for not being developed the way they are in their white Western nations, right? While enjoying all the benefits that the corporations that they pander to every day when they go buy their coffee, when they go buy their clothes, when they go buy their jewelry, when they go party, when they go grocery store, when they go buy luxury items, when they go buy things to drive, and then they go on the internet and show off. Those products and services are made by corporations, and they're backed by governments that will go and kill children in order to keep the overhead low so that you can go ahead and buy it overpriced and spend all your remaining money that you have on those said items, while they get rich and enjoy their lives, while you're stuck at your 9-to-5 job. If you have a job, when you're stuck at your 9-to-5 job from 4 to freaking 12 at night because you got to do overtime, when all you can do is wear that coat from home to work and from work to home. You can wear that sweater from home to work from home. And that's as much value as it has. I want y'all to think about how you're an economic slave in America right now, with all your shiny buildings and the trim on the buildings. Everything looks nice, but you're a slave just like the rest of them. You're exploited just like the rest of them. So you don't have any space to talk about your continental brothers and sisters. Because the same thing happened in your black neighborhoods is happening in our black nations by the same corporations, backed and sponsored and financed by the same governments. I want you to take that in consideration the next time you put on that fancy chain you got on, and them diamond rings, and that fancy overpriced shirt that looks plain, looks just like that other shirt you can get at Target. But because that white man name on it, you think it's valuable, and you think you're better than that African that's wearing rags, that you think is wearing rags, that you consider the clothing that they're wearing is rags, and that the rags that you have are better because a white man's name's on it. That's where we are mentally with it. All right. So without further ado, I'm gonna let you see this, because not all Europeans, because the thing is, Europeans are exploited too. You think regular Europeans in Europe have ever benefited from white supremacy? They've never benefited from white supremacy. No white person, no regular layman white persons have ever benefited from white supremacy. The only thing they've ever had is an idea that they're superior, that they're better. It's all mental in their head. But physically in the real world, they've never benefited. They've been killed because of white supremacy. Do you know how many white people had to die in order for which white people to enslave Africans? You know how many poor white people had to die of diseases and forced to fight wars, right, in nations, so that rich white people can exploit other groups of people? White people are just as much as victims. They just don't even know it. That's the best type of victim, the victim that don't know they're being victimized. The slave that doesn't know he's a slave. The serf that doesn't know he's a serf. The indentured servant that didn't realize he's an indentured servant. The wage slave that's just now realizing that he is a modern day slave. As long as they don't realize it, they keep trucking along thinking this is the way life is supposed to be. But anyway, I want you to take in consideration who are the architects of the dilapidation of all these countries in Africa. Before you judge an African country, I want you to think about, look at the companies that you see advertised: Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, you know, all the familiar names that you know and love as a Westerner. Since you identify with your nationality, the place you were forced to be a citizen of, instead of your race, the people, the person that you are, the people that you belong to, the homeland that's really yours, your real birthright. I want you to take in consideration who's destroying your place while you're talking shit about your brothers and sisters. Keep that in mind. Because one day it won't be like that. Right now, things are changing. African people globally are taking back what belongs to us. The revolution has been started. The rise has continued and has not slowed down, no matter what Europeans have attempted to do with their governments to poison us, to introduce viruses within our countries, to prop up dictators and bad men, to instigate tribal warfare, to push Islamic terrorism into African nations, to destabilize their countries and nations. This is all the things Europeans are doing into Africa to keep Africans down, to keep them from growing, to slow them down. But the great thing about Black people, the great thing about Africans, that will never be stopped. We are the default character. We are the mothers and fathers of these Europeans and these Asians that deem to take advantage of us, instead of just asking nicely and playing fair. Because there's plenty to go around. It's just that these barbarian, savage Neanderthals and their Denisovan Asian cousins, they're not human like us. Therefore, their societies are not set up like that. They're more selfish. They're not communal like us. So until they evolve into a better human being, until they get enough of that human DNA in them, we're going to have to deal with them the way they are. The same way we deal with any other virus, bacteria or predator. You deal with it in kind. You deal with it on a case by case basis, with the amount of force necessary to keep them at bay and to keep yourself and your family and your community safe. All right. But anyway, I want you guys to tell me what you think in the comment section about these low educated 12th grade American educated individuals who think that they sit on some sort of perch to be able to talk trash about the economic situations of African countries. Because what's going to happen is, and what I'm already seeing, in which Pan-Africans are warning all these people who want to delineate from Africa and African identities. I want you to understand right now that scales is tipping. The scale's tipping. And you're going to find yourself in North America, in a third world country, without resources, without institutions to back you up, to build you or allow you to thrive as a human being. You're going to sit back in America looking for a place to flee. And you're going to be looking at Africa, because the African countries are going to be thriving. They're going to be thriving with technology. They're going to be thriving with architecture. They're going to be thriving with stable governments that don't cannibalize their own people for the sake of profit, so they can buy more stuff that they don't need. You're going to wake up and see that the African continents and the people of the African continent have more money than you do in the West, have more assets than you do in the West, live a better, happier, stress-free life more than you do in the West. And you'll be begging for someone to donate a few dollars so you can get a plane ticket to go to Africa, to escape the winter. Anyway, That's all I got to say for now, guys. It's Afro Think Tank. Learn some, teach some. I'm out.
Start by saying the King of Belgium created a slave colony for 30 years. The government of Belgium ran the slave colony for another 40 years. The CIA assassinated your first popular leader, Mr. Lumumba, and then installed another dictatorship for the next 30 years. And then Glencore and others now suck out your cobalt without giving you tax income. We don't reflect on that. We say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you govern properly? And so we have a system, but we need a different system. We cannot turn this over to the private sector. We already did about 100 years ago. Not only to the private sector with the U.S. military behind it, with the defense of these property rights in the Minister of Honduras's country, where United Fruit ran the country for a long time. And their attorney was the foreign minister of the United States, Secretary Dulles, and his brother was the head of the CIA and overthrew the next door neighbor, Mr. Arbenz, to make sure that United Fruit could have its property. So we have a system, but we need a different system.